Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of rigid precision.
Right. It feels like engineering.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, you go to the hospital, the x-ray shows a jagged white line on a black background, and the doctor just points to it and says, there is the fracture.
It provides a really comforting binary. I mean, we have an intrinsic psychological need for phenomena to be visible, neatly categorized, and objectively verifiable.
Yeah, we really do.
We want the universe to operate like a clock on a table.
But then you step into the world of deep cosmology, and suddenly that x-ray machine is fundamentally broken. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, honestly, incredibly murky.
Oh, completely.
We gather these faint radio waves, we run them through millions of lines of algorithmic assumptions, and when a blurry shadow appears on the digital film, we just confidently declare that we've found the ultimate monsters of the universe.
We treat the blur as a physical object.
Right. And welcome to the deep dive. Today, you and I are going on a mission. And I want to be clear to you listening, this isn't just a casual review of new space photos. It is a forensic audit of 20th century physics.
We are dissecting a fundamental assumption that has been treated as, well, unquestionable dogma for decades now.
We're here to question the reference spine of reality itself.
Yeah, we're looking at how an entire branch of astrophysics might have built a sprawling, highly mathematical mythology around a perceptual shadow.
It's wild to even think about. Our guide for this exploration is a singular, honestly, highly disruptive source. Sandeep J. Chavan's 2025 book, Black Holes Don't Exist.
The title really doesn't pull any punches.
No, it really doesn't. The central premise is unapologetically right there on the cover. The black hole, the ultimate cosmic beast that supposedly swallows light, tears through the fabric of time, and, crushes matter into a singularity it was never actually discovered.
According to Chavan, it is a mirage.
A literal mirage. A conceptual collapse born entirely from the limits of our own perception and the failure of our own tools.
And Chavan presents a framework that doesn't merely attack mainstream science, which is important to note. It attempts to offer a rigorous mechanical correction.
Right. He's not just complaining, he's rebuilding.
Exactly. He argues that we have taken a mathematical failure, like a point where our equations literally cannot process the data, and we hallucinated a physical object to justify that failure.
We invented a monster to explain why we couldn't see into the dark.
That's beautifully put. We couldn't explain the math breaking, so we blamed space.
The book actually opens with a dedication to Albert Einstein, which I found incredibly poignant. Chavan praises Einstein for, quote, sensing the truth before science was ready to see it.
Because a lot of people forget this historical detail. Einstein actively resisted the concept of complete gravitational collapse.
Yeah, he vehemently disliked where the math of his own general relativity was being taken by others, right?
He really did. When Carl Schwarzschild first solved Einstein's field equations in 1916, the math produced an anomaly.
Okay.
It suggested that if you compress mass small enough, gravity would become infinite. But Einstein saw that infinity not as a physical prediction, but as a clear indicator that the mathematical model had reached its boundary.
Like an error message.
Precisely. Einstein had a profound intuition that nature abhors a true singularity. He stood at the edge of this mathematical myth, looked at the infinite variables, and quietly refused to believe that reality simply deletes itself at the center of a dense star.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's unpack the mechanics of that specific historical deception. Because if there is no monster in the dark, we have to understand what we're actually looking at.
Right.
And how some of the smartest minds on the planet convinced themselves it was real. How does a mathematical bug become a physical, terrifying entity?
Well, it stems from a profound philosophical vulnerability in theoretical physics. When an equation produces an infinite density or infinite curvature, it universally means your theoretical framework is broken down.
It's out of bounds.
Yeah. It means you are trying to measure the ocean with a ruler, and the ruler has snapped.
The snapped ruler. I love that.
But with black holes, the scientific community took a highly unusual pivot. Instead of admitting the theory had reached its applicable limit, physicists took that mathematical infinite loop and decided it must correspond to a literal physical structure out in the cosmos.
So they took a failure of the blueprint and assumed it was a feature of the building.
They reified an artifact. They gave it a name, the singularity, and began describing its properties. But a singularity is not a physical object.
No.
It possesses no dimensions. It is an alarm bell ringing inside the theoretical framework warning you that your descriptive language has failed.
So if there is no singularity, no infinitely dense pinprick of collapsed matter, what is actually out there in those incredibly dense regions of space?
This is where Chavan introduces a concept from his UED framework, which stands for Universal Energy Dynamics.
Universal energy dynamics, got it.
He argues that what we are looking at is a ripple saturation zone, or RSZ.
An RSZ. Okay, to conceptualize the RSZ, we have to kind of entirely discard the notion of space as a massive empty container, right? Like holding distinct objects.
Yes, completely. In UED, space is an active, structured, tension-bearing medium. When a massive energetic event occurs, like the core collapse of a supergiant star, the local tension in that surrounding medium becomes overwhelmingly extreme.
Well, the gradients of energy reach a state of complete saturation.
Exactly. The density of these ripples becomes so steep, and the interference patterns so complex that our remote instruments and our mathematical models simply lose the resolution required to process them.
See, I'm struggling with the mechanics here, though.
Okay, how so?
If it's just a loss of resolution, why do we observe such drastic physical phenomena? Like, we look at the center of our own galaxy, Sagittarius A star, and we see massive stars whipping around an invisible center point at significant fractions of the speed of light.
They're definitely orbiting something.
Right. They're orbiting something. Let me offer an analogy to see if I'm grasping Chavan's point. Imagine I take a photograph of a sprinter running at top speed, but my camera's shutter speed is way too slow.
Okay, I see where you're going.
The resulting image shows a blurry, smeared shape.
Yeah.
Mainstream physics, in this analogy, looks at the photo and concludes that the runner themselves is physically constructed out of blurry, smeared pixels.
Right.
But Chavan is saying, no, the runner is perfectly solid, but your equipment cannot resolve the data. Am I getting that?
You're absolutely getting that. Taking that blurry runner analogy further, imagine if we built an entire mathematical subdiscipline based on the assumption that human beings possess blurry edges that distort the light around them.
Oh, wow. We would invent complex equations to describe how biological matter smears through the air.
Exactly. And that sounds absurd, but we see stars orbiting a region that appears dark and silent to our specific range of instruments. The intense field tension is absolutely real. The gravitational effects, which we will redefine shortly, those are real.
Right, something is pulling, or, well, causing that orbit.
Yes. But the object we invented to sit at the center of that tension, the black hole, is a fiction. We observed a saturation point in our data and built a physical temple around it.
So our camera shutter was too slow, so we authored a century of literature about blurry humans.
We truly did.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. But to truly understand why the camera is blurry, we have to fundamentally redefine the air the runner is moving through.
We have to look at the invisible water the universe is swimming in.
Which moves us into the core of the UED framework. The book beautifully refers to it as the physics of stillness. Let's rigorously debate this. If space is not a vacuum where massive objects are just tossing invisible graviton particles or grappling hooks at each other, what is it?
People are going to hear the word medium and immediately scream that this is just a resurrection of the 19th century luminiferous ether.
Right, the ether, which the Michelson-Morley experiment supposedly disproved over 100 years ago.
Exactly. But it is crucial to distinguish this from the classical ether. The 19th century ether was imagined as a physical fluid-like, a literal substance that filled an otherwise empty box, and objects moved through it, creating friction or drag.
So like a boat moving through water.
Yes. Chavan introduces something different. Structured vacuum energy, or SVE. The SVE is not a substance sitting inside space. It is space.
It is space. Okay.
Yeah. It's a tension-ready, memory-rich, fundamental substrate. Mainstream physics largely treats the vacuum as a passive stage, maybe bubbling with quantum probability, but ultimately just a theater where particles perform. SVE suggests the theater itself is the only actor.
So SVE is the fabric, but it is entirely based on tension. I find this conceptualization of energy really fascinating because in the standard model, we think of energy as a little packet, right? Like a photon flying like a bullet through an empty room.
Not in UED. In the UED model, energy is tension stored, shifted, or transferred within the SCE ripple field.
Okay, visualize this for me.
Imagine a massive, tightly stretched drum skin. If you press down firmly on one specific area, the tension shifts across the entire surface of the drum.
Okay, yeah.
Nothing physical traveled from your finger to the opposite edge of the drum, but the tension propagated instantly. The structure of the drum skin rebalanced itself.
Wow. This implies there are no fundamental particles shooting around independently. No electrons or quarks acting like tiny billiard balls.
No billiard balls at all. They're only stable, localized ripple formations within the SVE. What we call a particle is just a tightly wound knot of tension, maintaining coherence within the substrate.
A knot of tension.
Yeah. And if we accept that matter and energy are merely structured tension within a continuous field, it completely dismantles our conventional Newtonian understanding of force and gravity.
Oh, we have to go after gravity because that is the pillar supporting the entire black hole concept. Newton told us gravity is an attractive pulling force between masses.
Right.
And then Einstein updated that by saying, well, gravity is the geometric curvature of the spacetime fabric caused by mass, like the heavy bowling ball on the trampoline.
But UED redefines gravity entirely, discarding both the invisible pulling rope and the trampoline. Chavan calls gravity a ripple gradient.
A ripple gradient. Walk me through the mechanics of a gradient.
If mass is simply a highly concentrated region of structured tension within the SVE, its very presence alters the tension of the field immediately surrounding it. The SVE is perpetually seeking equilibrium. It wants to rebalance its tension. A ripple gradient is essentially a slope of tension density. The field creates a path of least resistance to stabilize itself.
So gravity is not a force reaching out and pulling an object.
Not at all. Gravity is the localized SVE field, naturally rebalancing its tension structure, and the objects within that field are simply carried along the gradient.
The book uses the classic pedagogical example of the falling apple, Newton's apple.
Yes.
We are universally taught that the Earth possesses a property that reaches up, grabs the apple, and pulls it down to the dirt. But under UED, the Earth is just a massive, highly structured region of SVE tension.
Right. The space surrounding the Earth has a steep ripple gradient because of that massive tension structure.
So when the apple breaks from the branch,
It's not being dragged by a force. The apple is a smaller knot of tension, and it is simply resolving its own ripple imbalance by aligning with the much stronger dominant gradient of the Earth.
it is a process of synchronization.
Yes. The apple is seeking field coherence, not falling due to attraction.
That provides such an elegant mechanical explanation for why astronauts feel weightless in orbit.
Doesn't it?
Because mainstream science says they are in constant freefall, moving sideways fast enough to keep missing the Earth. But under UED, they aren't magically shielded from a pull, nor are they constantly falling.
Right. They have achieved a balanced ripple alignment with the planet.
They are surfing the gradient in a state of sustained equilibrium.
The gradient remains absolutely present, but their localized SVE field tension is harmonized with it. They feel no weight, because weight is merely the sensation of resisting a tension gradient.
I have to challenge this with a famous counterexample, though.
Go for it.
If there's no pulling force, and gravity is just the perceived propagation of tension, what about the Apollo 15 experiment? Commander David Scott dropped a falcon feather and a geology hammer on the surface of the moon, and they hit the lunar dust at the exact same millisecond.
A classic demonstration.
Mainstream physics uses this to prove that gravitational acceleration is independent of mass in a vacuum. A pulling force accelerates everything equally. How does UED account for the simultaneous impact without a pulling force?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, mainstream physics states that gravity acts equally on all mass. Ripple physics approaches this by stating that mass, the amount of internal structured tension, is not the active variable in freefall.
What's the active variable then?
Alignment is the variable. On Earth, if you drop a feather, its alignment with the SVE gradient is heavily disrupted by the atmosphere. The air molecules create frictional ripple interference, breaking the feather's coherence with the dominant gradient.
So the air is essentially confusing the feather's attempt to synchronize with the Earth's tension?
In a manner of speaking, yeah. On the moon, that atmospheric interference is completely absent. Therefore, both the feather and the heavy hammer, regardless of how much internal structured tension they contain individually, are presented with a pure, unobstructed lunar ripple gradient. They both realign and synchronize with that gradient identically. It is a demonstration of equal resolution to a field imbalance, not equal application of a pulling force.
Equal resolution. So they are both solving the local tension puzzle at the exact same rate because nothing is blocking the signal.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the physics of stillness. The SVE substrate itself does not move. It is motionless. Tension seeks resolution, and what we interpret biologically and instrumentally as physical motion is just the shifting of symmetry within the SVE.
So the universe is perfectly still. It is only the propagation of tension patterns passing through it that creates the illusion of kinetic activity.
A shifting symmetry on a perfectly still drum?
This is a monumental shift in how we visualize reality, but it's necessary to establish this groundwork before we tackle the most dramatic feature of the black hole myth.
The point of no return.
Exactly. If gravity is just a ripple gradient, the substrate rebalancing itself, what happens when that gradient becomes unimaginably intense? What happens when the tension becomes so steep, so chaotic, that the field cannot resolve it?
This naturally leads us to the dismantling of the event horizon and the concept of the ATT limit.
The event horizon is the ultimate boundary in astrophysics. It's defined classically as a spherical membrane in space where the escape velocity required to leave the gravitational pull exceeds the speed of light.
Right, and since nothing can travel faster than light, nothing can escape.
But if we apply UED logic, we just establish that gravity is not a pulling force. There is no such thing as an escape velocity because nothing is being held captive.
Precisely. Therefore, the event horizon cannot physically exist as a spatial wall.
Okay, so if it's not a physical trapdoor in space, what exactly is the boundary that our telescopes are failing to see past?
Chavan defines it as the alignment threshold time, or the ATT limit.
The ATT limit, the silent countdown.
It's a temporal boundary, not a spatial one. ATT is the maximum temporal window an observer has to maintain phase coherence with a specific ripple field.
Let's break down the word observer here, because we aren't just talking about a human looking through a telescope, right?
No, an observer is any system capable of receiving and processing data. A human eye, a highly advanced digital sensor, a radio telescope array. These are all observers.
Got it.
When an observer interacts with a highly tense region of SVE, the observer system requires a specific amount of time to decode that tension, to resolve the incoming ripples into meaningful structured data.
It's like trying to buffer a 4K video on a severely limited bandwidth connection. Your computer needs time to process the packets of information.
Yes, perfect analogy.
If the data is coming in too fast or is too complex, the video freezes. The screen goes black.
It's a very apt mechanical comparison. If the ripple gradient is incredibly steep and saturated, which is what happens in the core of what we mistakenly call a black hole, the incoming tension data is overwhelmingly dense.
And the buffer fails.
The ATT limit is the exact moment your coherence timer hits zero. The event horizon is simply a perceptual expiry point.
Wow. Chavan outlines 5 specific stages of this ATT breakdown in the text, and I think detailing them really grounds the mechanics of this theory.
Let's go through them.
Stage 1 is the ripple gradient encounter. The observer engages with an incoming SVE field.
Right, the initial reception of tension signals.
Stage 2 is coherent sync. Your sensory equipment or your telescope attempts to decode the incoming pattern to extract structure.
Trying to make sense of the noise.
Then stage 3 is gradient steepening. The tension increases dramatically as the observer looks deeper into the anomalous zone.
And now the processing system is under severe stress. The field tension is compounding rapidly, becoming too complex for the hardware to map in real time.
Stage 4. ATT exceeded. Your coherence timer mathematically runs out. You can no longer resolve the field within your temporal window.
You've hit the wall.
And that triggers stage 5. Blackout.
Total sensory failure. The signal fragments and dies. And this highlights a profound psychological bias in modern science, honestly.
How so?
Well, we are so conditioned to trust our billion-dollar instruments that when our digital sensors hit stage 5 and report total darkness, we conclude that the universe itself has produced a region of total darkness.
Oh, I see. We assume the physical light has been swallowed.
Exactly.
Which introduces the light trap lie. The fundamental mainstream claim is that a black hole's gravity is so astronomically strong it physically bends light backward, trapping the photons inside.
Right, standard relativity.
But if light is not a photon, if it's not a tiny physical ball flying through the vacuum, how does the UED model explain the undeniable darkness we observe in these regions?
Well, because UED asserts there are no independent particles, light is not a thing that travels.
Light doesn't travel.
No, light is a continuous ripple alignment event. It is a resonance established between the emitting source, the SVE medium, and the receiving observer. You do not see a photon arriving at your retina. Your biological hardware achieves a temporary ripple coherence with the tension state of the source.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm following this perfectly. So a black hole doesn't trap light because there's literally nothing physical to trap.
Exactly. The observer is simply locked out of the ripple stream. Their system can no longer synchronize with the extreme chaotic field tension of the RSC. The alignment event breaks down.
So the light didn't vanish into an abyss.
No, your equipment's capacity to resonate with the light shattered.
The book uses a brilliant analogy here involving a torch and a fog bank. Let's imagine you're standing on a bridge over a deep, misty gorge. You lower a high-powered torch down into the thick fog on a long rope.
I love this visualization.
As the torch descends, the light gets dimmer and dimmer until eventually it disappears completely into blackness. Did the torch turn off? No. Did a monster lurking in the fog consume the light?
Definitely not.
No. The density of the fog simply created so much interference that you, the specific observer standing on the bridge, lost the biological and instrumental capacity to resolve the light source.
Right.
The event horizon is just the specific depth where the fog defeats your eyes. It is a limit of our time and our biology, not a physical tear in the space-time fabric.
And if we apply stringent logic to that analogy, it reveals a massive flaw in the mainstream model.
Which is?
ATT is entirely observer relative. If you had a different observer with a vastly superior coherence capacity, say the theoretical sensor, with an ATT limit thousands of times higher than our best radio telescopes, they would be able to decode that saturated tension.
Oh, wow.
For that advanced observer, the event horizon as we know it would not exist. They would see straight through the darkness into a highly active, brightly structured tension zone.
The boundary exists entirely in our perception, not in the cosmos.
Exactly.
Okay, this is where you listening are going to violently push back, and rightfully so. Because if black holes are just perceptual mirages, if they're just the localized failure of our own ATT timers, how do we explain the hard evidence?
The physical proof.
Yeah, we literally took a picture of one. The Event Horizon Telescope Collaboration released that famous image in 2019. The glowing asymmetrical orange donut with the black center.
Yes, the famous photo.
And what about LIGO? The Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. Thousands of scientists won Nobel Prizes for detecting gravitational waves generated by black holes crashing into each other millions of light years away.
Hard to ignore that.
We have to subject this modern evidence to a forensic audit. Let's start with the EHT image from 2019. We saw the monster.
Well, we saw an image, but it's critical to understand how that image was manufactured.
Manufactured.
The media heralded it as a photograph, but it was not a photograph in any optical sense. The EHT uses very long baseline interferometry. They gathered petabytes of fragmented, noisy radio waves data from telescopes across the globe.
Okay.
But to turn that scattered noise into a coherent picture, they had to run it through complex algorithms.
And algorithms require assumptions. They require starting parameters.
Exactly. The algorithms were explicitly trained on general relativity simulations.
Oh.
They fed the computer models of what a black hole should look like according to Einstein's math, and asked the computer to piece the radio data together to match those models.
That feels like a process highly vulnerable to confirmation bias.
It absolutely is.
If the EHT didn't capture a picture of a collapsed object, what is the UED interpretation of that glowing orange ring and the dark void in the middle?
Chavan categorizes the EHT image as a portrait of saturation. Look at the structural components of the image. The bright asymmetrical ring is a massive ripple interference zone.
A friction zone.
Yes, it is a region where incoming SVE tension is experiencing extreme friction as it attempts to reorganize. The immense tension discharge produces the radio frequencies we catch.
And the dark center.
The dark center is not a bottomless, well-swallowing physical matter.
Yeah.
It is a ripple void. It is the exact localized coordinate where the ATT limit of the EHT array was breached.
Oh.
The dark center is the blackout zone, where our specific global instruments entirely lost phase coherence.
We didn't image a cosmic object. We mapped the exact boundary of our own technological blindness.
We took a photograph of our own resolution failure.
That is deeply unsettling, but logically tracking. But we cannot easily dismiss LIGO. The LIGO facilities are marvels of engineering.
Truly they are.
They use highly calibrated lasers firing down 4-kilometer-long vacuum tubes to measure distortions at the subatomic level. When they detect a distortion, mainstream physics says they are measuring the physical stretching and squeezing of the space-time fabric caused by two black holes merging.
Right.
If space-time isn't a stretchable fabric, what are those highly sensitive mirrors actually measuring? Did a global team of scientists just misread their own lasers?
No, the scientists are not misreading the physical disturbance. The data spike is undeniably real. A massive energetic event absolutely occurred.
So what's the issue?
What UED challenges is the narrative superimposed onto that data. LIGO is not detecting gravitational waves tearing through a geometric fabric. It is detecting RFR ripple field reactions.
RFR, ripple field reactions. Break down the mechanics of an RFR.
Remember that SVE is a medium under continuous tension. When a region of extreme ripple tension, an RSZ, undergoes a catastrophic structural shift, perhaps releasing pent-up imbalance, it discharges a massive shockwave of tension into the surrounding SVE substrate.
Like dropping a boulder in a tense pond?
Yes. This shockwave forces localized coherence shifts across the field.
The substrate is furiously realigning itself to accommodate the sudden burst of tension.
Exactly. And LIGO's incredibly delicate laser interferometers are sensitive enough to detect these temporary realignments of SVE coherence as they wash over the Earth.
So the mirrors move because the tension matrix moves.
The mirrors shift because the tension matrix defining their position momentarily alters. LIGO is measuring tension equalizing across the universal field, not the collision of two imaginary, infinitely dense singularities.
So the physical notes, the massive discharge of energy happened, the detection happened. But because the scientific community only has the black hole vocabulary, they forced the valid data to confirm the prevailing mythology.
They observed the ripples on the pond and concluded that two invisible sea monsters must have bumped into each other.
Wow. This forensic audit of our instruments also leads Chavan to a scathing critique of particle colliders, places like the Large Hadron Collider at CERN.
Right, high-energy physics.
Mainstream physics uses massive superconducting magnets to smash particles together at 99.99% the speed of light. The goal is to shatter them to see what the fundamental building blocks of reality are and to momentarily simulate the conditions of the Big Bang.
Yes.
But Chavan views this methodology as fundamentally flawed.
Chavan argues that intentionally introducing violent, catastrophic instability into a system does not reveal its natural, fundamental structure. It merely reveals how the SVE field reacts to traumatic stress.
The dynamite analogy from the book is devastating to high-energy physics. Let me introduce it because it perfectly encapsulates the critique.
Go ahead.
Imagine an art historian trying to understand the delicate brushstrokes, the chemical composition, and the subtle intent behind a Renaissance masterpiece. Now imagine that historian decides the best way to analyze the painting is to strap a stick of dynamite to it, detonate it, and then meticulously study the shredded fragments of burning canvas and melted paint flying through the air, claiming, this is how the painting was originally constructed.
It's absurd, right? By smashing tension nodes together at the speed of light, colliders simply force a localized ripple overload. They induce a catastrophic tension collapse in the SVE.
So what are all those particle tracks they measure?
The complex branching particle tracks we observe in the detectors are not newly discovered fundamental pieces of reality. According to UED, they are simply realignment paths, scar tissue, in a severely disturbed SVE field.
We aren't finding the God particle. We are just forcing the field to vomit out chaotic ripple echoes that aren't naturally stable.
What's fascinating here is that we are measuring our own inflicted coherence failures. We build machines to break the substrate, study the breakage, and as Chavan notes, we award ourselves Nobel Prizes for discovering the shards.
We keep shattering the mirror and studying the fragments, genuinely believing we are mapping the room.
It's tragic in a way.
This deconstruction is exhausting, but it necessitates a pivot to functionality. Because if the dark void at the center of the galaxy is not a destroyer of worlds, what is its actual purpose?
Right.
The universe, on a macro scale, is remarkably efficient. It doesn't sustain massive, complex systems without a functional thermodynamic reason. If it's not a devouring mouth, what is the actual role of a cosmic reset zone?
This is where Chavan moves from destroying the old paradigm to constructing a much more elegant one.
Wow.
A CRZ, a cosmic reset zone, functions as a galactic recycling center.
A recycling center.
Mainstream physics paints black holes as the ultimate fatalistic graveyard. Matter falls in, gets crushed into nothingness, and the story ends. But UDT posits that the universe is a profoundly self-balancing system.
It has to be.
When a region of the SVE field accumulates too much unresolved, chaotic ripple tension, perhaps from the remnants of a dying star or a massive galactic collision, the field desperately needs a mechanism to disperse that lethal tension.
It requires a cosmic pressure relief valve to prevent the entire galactic structure from shaking itself apart?
Exactly. The CRZ is that valve. It actively absorbs the unresolved tension. And here's the vital mechanical distinction. The mainstream models tell us matter is violently falling into a hole due to an inescapable pull.
Spaghettification.
Right, but nothing is falling. The structured energy, the matter, is simply losing its internal coherence and dissolving back into the neutral background equilibrium of the SVE. The CRZ is not a garbage disposal. It is a zone of field therapy.
Field therapy.
It actively dissolves the local imbalance to preserve the wider coherence of the galaxy.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Let me juxtapose the mainstream sink model with Chavan's sponge model, because the difference in perspective is staggering.
Oh, the sponge model is great.
In the mainstream view, the black hole is a sinkhole. Gravity grabs you, pulls you over the edge, and you are violently spaghettified and crushed. But in UED, it's a sponge. Things are not pulled in against their will. The internal structure of the matter simply relaxes.
Yes.
The chaotic tension lets go. The CRZ absorbs the excess tension and quietly dissolves it back into a harmonious blank state.
The matter is destructured and smoothly redistributed. It is returned to the baseline substrate, not annihilated.
This forces us to reevaluate all the extreme violent phenomena we observe around these galactic centers, the superheated accretion disks that glow brighter than millions of suns, the relativistic jets shooting out thousands of light years into deep space.
Standard models really struggle with those.
Right. Mainstream science says accretion disks are matter violently swirling the drain, experiencing friction before being eaten, and the jets are matter being magnetically flung out just before crossing the event horizon. How does the SVE substrate explain these?
UED reframes accretion disks as ripple friction zones. It is a boundary region where incoming highly structured matter has not yet fully surrendered to the dissolution process.
So it's fighting the reset.
It is resisting the steep gradient, and that structural resistance causes immense localized friction, generating the blinding light and heat we observe.
And the massive jets, the gamma ray bursts.
They are definitively not chaotic accidents or cosmic belches. They are precision-driven phase alignments.
Precision-driven.
The CRZ is actively and intentionally ejecting specific frequencies of misaligned tension. It channels the excess pressure out along the polar axis to preserve the overall rotational symmetry and tension balance of the entire galaxy. It is a highly regulated exhaust system.
So the center of a galaxy doesn't flare up because it's a messy eater dropping its food. It flares up because the underlying ripple logic mathematically requires an escape route for excess pressure. It is exhaling to maintain equilibrium.
Which completely and effortlessly solves the infamous information paradox that plagued Stephen Hawking in theoretical physics for 40 years.
Oh man, we have to dive into this. If black holes dissolve things, we run straight into the information paradox. For you listening, the paradox fundamentally threatens quantum mechanics.
There's a massive crisis.
Quantum physics dictates the unitarity principle, the idea that quantum information, the unique structural blueprint of a particle, can never be permanently destroyed. Hawking realized that if black holes slowly leak energy and eventually evaporate completely, what we call Hawking radiation, the information of everything that ever fell into the black hole would be permanently erased from the universe.
It triggered a massive decades-long crisis in physics. Theoretical physicists were forced to invent wildly complex patchwork theories to save quantum mechanics. They conceptualized firewalls, holographic projections on the event horizon, anything to avoid admitting that information was being deleted.
But Chavan bypasses the entire debate. How does UED fix the paradox?
The paradox is an illusion generated by a false premise. The crisis only exists because Hawking and his peers assumed the black hole was an isolated physical object that consumes and destroys. In the UED framework, there is no paradox because information is never destroyed, nor is it trapped behind a magical wall.
How does tension store quantum information, though? What happens to the structural blueprint?
When a highly structured object enters a CRZ, it loses its local phase coherence. Its specific tension pattern becomes saturated. The information does not vanish. It is absorbed as pure tension into the wider SVE matrix.
It joins the ocean.
It simply enters an unreadable state. Eventually, through those massive polar jets and the subtle ongoing gradient shifts across the galaxy, that stored tension is redistributed back into the universe. The information just stops speaking a language our instruments could read for a while.
It's like taking a complex, beautifully constructed Lego castle, disassembling it block by block, and throwing the pieces back into the main bin.
Great analogy.
The local structure of the castle is gone. It has lost its phase coherence. But the individual blocks, the fundamental information, are completely intact, undamaged, and ready to be utilized in a new structure.
Resolution failure, followed by temporary storage, followed by redistribution. The universe never needed holographic firewalls. It just needed us to understand that the information never left the continuous field.
This reframing is profoundly beautiful. It transforms the cosmos from a terrifying, violent, and fatalistic arena into a deeply balanced, intelligent, self-correcting system.
It really does.
And this leads us to the final and undoubtedly the most philosophically mind-bending aspect of Chavan's work. We must bridge the macrocosmology of galaxies with the microreality of human biology, because the mechanics of the cosmos are intimately tied to the mechanics of the observer.
This is where UED transcends standard astrophysics and enters the realm of deep philosophy.
Yeah, let's talk about the biological connection.
If everything we physically experience, light, gravity, matter, is merely the result of our biological system achieving ripple alignment with the substrate, we are forced to ask, what happens when our biological system degrades and can no longer maintain that alignment?
Chavan makes the astonishing assertion that biological death is simply a ripple misalignment event.
It is functionally and mechanically identical in its logic to the death of a collapsing star.
Wow.
In both scenarios, a localized structure of tension loses the capacity to maintain phase coherence with the surrounding SVE field. The human observer loses the biological ability to synchronize their internal neural tension state with the external substrate.
I am grappling with the philosophical weight of this. If consciousness is essentially an ongoing process of field alignment, then death is not a destination we arrive at. It's just an ATT limit.
Your conscious, subjective experience of reality is strictly bounded by your biological alignment threshold time.
Your own personal timer.
Exactly. The exact moment your neural architecture can no longer hold a coherent thought, process a sensory input, or decode the external tension matrix, you hit your cognitive ATT limit.
Yeah.
The biological blackout zone occurs.
But the crucial point here, connecting back to the information paradox, is that nothing is deleted.
Just like the matter entering the cosmic reset zone, nothing of substance is destroyed. The highly specific tension pattern, the complex energetic signature that was you, simply loses local, isolated coherence and dissolves smoothly back into the background equilibrium of the SVE.
The ATT of the human mind. It is a staggering realization. It implies that the black hole isn't merely an optical illusion located millions of light years away in deep space. It is a universal metaphor for any perceptual expiration.
Anytime we reach our limit.
Whenever our biological or instrumental timer runs out, whether we are peering into the chaotic center of a distant galaxy or facing the inevitable breakdown of our own bodies, we project a dark monster into the void to explain our failure to comprehend it. We call it a singularity, or we call it the Grim Reaper. But in reality, it is merely the boundary of our own resolution.
It is a deeply harmonizing, almost therapeutic concept. It entirely removes the existential dread of the void.
Because there is no void.
Right. Because the void is not a physical threat. It is just a failure of your instrument to read the tension. The universe does not move. It only reconfigures. Reality operates entirely within structured tension. As Chavan eloquently concludes, stillness wins.
Stillness wins. The universe is a perfect, silent ocean of tension, endlessly shifting its symmetry, reconfiguring its patterns, and recycling its imbalances without ever losing a single drop of information.
We are just temporary, highly coherent ripples within that ocean, blessed with enough localized ATT to witness the music of the substrate for a brief, remarkable window.
So, what does this forensic audit mean for us as we conclude this deep dive? Let's distill the core takeaway of Chavan's thesis. Black holes, as we have been rigorously trained to imagine them, infinitely dense, collapsed stars, devouring monsters, literal tears in the physical fabric of spacetime do not exist.
They simply aren't there.
There are no singularities. There is no attractive pulling force of gravity. There is only the SVE field, the continuous rebalancing of ripple gradients, and the hard limits of our own ATT.
We have spent a century worshiping the silence of our own confusion. We looked at a mathematical failure in our equations and a perceptual blackout in our telescopes, and we drew a terrifying sea monster on the cosmic map.
We really did.
UED invites us to erase the monster, put down the dynamite, and finally begin studying the water itself.
And for you listening, why does this abstract astrophysics matter to your daily life? Because it fundamentally shifts the paradigm of how you exist in the world. You are not an isolated organism living in a cold universe of violent, destructive forces trying to crush you into nothingness.
You're part of the field.
You are embedded in a living, constantly balancing, ripple-responsive field. A field that actively seeks stillness, equilibrium, and harmony. When structures fall apart, they are not destroyed. They are simply returning to the sponge to be reset.
It is a profound shift from a fatalistic, chaotic cosmology to a functional, restorative one.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, lingering proposition. A thought experiment built entirely on the relentless logic of Chavan's text. We have firmly established today that everything we call real, everything we can photograph or touch, is exclusively defined by what we can resolve within our specific, limited human ATT window.
Right.
We only see the tension ripples that we have the processing time and the biological bandwidth to decode.
Our reality is a filtered subset of the total field.
So, what would happen if human consciousness, or our artificial intelligence technology, suddenly evolved to drastically, exponentially expand our ATT limit?
Oh, that's a wild thought.
If the event horizon is truly nothing more than a perceptual boundary and we somehow remove that boundary, would the dark, seemingly empty void of space instantly vanish from our sight?
Because the limit is gone.
Would we suddenly look up to the night sky and see a glaring, blindingly bright, fully structured universe of intersecting tension ripples that has been sitting right next to us, completely invisible this entire time?
It heavily implies that the darkness of the night sky is not empty space at all. It is just the absolute limit of our current eyesight.
We truly thought we needed a massive X-ray machine to diagnose the broken bones of the cosmos, but it turns out we were just staring into a murky mirror, mistaking the fog on the glass for a bottomless void. It's time to wipe the mirror clean. Thanks for conducting this audit with us today. Keep questioning the fog.